Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, Moonlit Books. My name is Kristen and today I'm going to be discussing the incredibly popular young adult fantasy series Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. Yes, I am releasing this video the day before the Netflix series comes out. No, this video has nothing to do with the Netflix series. I'm only going to be talking about the books. So if you're looking for content about the Netflix series, that is not it, and I apologize. But I will be talking about these wonderful, wonderful books. So if you're interested to stick around for that, please feel free. We're gonna dive all over the place. It's gonna be so much fun. I'm like so excited. But before we get too far into it, I would really appreciate it if you would consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. I upload new bookish content every Thursday. Okay, so I'm just gonna start with a spoiler-free, like, blurby description of this series and then talk about my thoughts about the series without any sort of spoilers. So these books follow Alina Starkov, who is a map maker working for the First Army in the country of Ravka. And right as this series starts, we learn that Ravka has been divided by a darkness called the Shadowfold. And this consumes all light and is home to these like flying demon things called Volcra. And Alina is sent on a mission with a group from the army to enter and cross the Shadowfold. And while she's there, she discovers that she is a Grisha, which is the sort of magicians and magical folk who exist in this universe. And her specific power is that she can summon sunlight, and it is because of her being there that this mission survives and that they're able to return safely back to their base because her power summoning sunlight was able to kind of fend off the demons that are living in the Shadowfold. And from there we begin to follow her journey as the quote-unquote chosen one. She is more or less prophesized as the only one who can potentially save Ravka from the Shadowfold and this centuries-old dark magic. So that is the basic premise of this series, and of course there is also a questionable romance love triangle, because would it really be a YA fantasy series without one? That is all that I'm going to give in terms of a blurb, because I feel like most people at least kind of know what this series is about at this point in time, and so now we're just gonna dive into my spoiler-free review. Most of this video is going to be spoiler-free, but this first section is just like my little review before I really dive into all of the depth and what I really want to talk about. So, that being said, these books were good. Like, they weren't the best thing I've ever read, but I definitely enjoyed all of them. I gave all of them 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and the biggest thing that I liked about this series is that it felt really nostalgic, which I find really interesting because I have never read this series before, but I grew up reading books like The Hunger Games and Divergent and The Maze Runner, and this series was actually written and like the first book was published in the same year that Divergent was published. So I'm thinking that because all of those books were written and published in a similar time frame, that's why they have a very similar feeling to them. In terms of this series, as far as fantasy goes, it's a pretty easy fantasy series. I found the magic system to be really easily followed, and while there are definitely times that I kind of wish they had dove deeper into the magic system, if you are looking to start a fantasy series as like a first-time fantasy reader or someone who just likes a lighter, easier to understand magic system, then this is definitely like a good place to start or a good place to go to if that's something that you're looking for. Past that, in this first little section, I just need to touch on the romance in these books. To be honest, I did not find anything about this series to be at all like romantically satisfying. If you only enjoy books for the romance, there is a very slight chance that this series will do it for you, but it has like this love triangle square thing that honestly I just found to be quite distracting from the rest of the story. And while there were moments of the romance that I did enjoy. I definitely just felt like it could have been worked in a lot better way to really add to the story rather than feeling like a distraction from it. That being said, if you're into like a super dark villain, enemies to lover, love interest, or a childhood friends to lovers like storyline, then this series has both of them as options, so do with that what you will. Alright, so that is where I'm going to end the completely spoiler-free section of this video. Well, I wouldn't consider the next few sections to be super spoilery. If you haven't read the books, honestly, you might just be more confused than anything else about what I'm saying. But if you want to hear more about like the plotline and the characters, then you can definitely stick around. However, if you are not interested in diving more deeply into all of that, then this is where I leave you. Thank you for joining me this far. Okay, so for the next chunk of this video, I'm going to break it down into 5 different sections, which are the plot and pacing, the magic system, the characters, the romance, and the ending. And the only section of this that I would consider really spoilery is the ending section, and I will give you another warning before we get there. So, let's just continue right along. Starting with the plot and the pacing. Overall, I found the plot and the general storyline of this series to be so good. Watching Alina grow from a powerless girl, a map maker working for the army, into one of the most powerful Grisha was just such a wonderful journey to go on with her. And another thing that I really appreciated about the storyline was the way that Leigh Bardugo tied each of the books in with one of the amplifiers. There was just something to me about the way that the story was told and the way that the world was built that was so incredibly captivating. Alina went on such a wild ride from the start of the series to the end. And so let's just dive a little bit more deeply about the plot of each of the books individually and some specific moments. So, starting with Shadow and Bone, this one was honestly just okay in my opinion. At least that's how I felt for the first 200-ish pages of this book. While the world that Leigh Bardugo created is just so wonderful, all of the time that she took to kind of dive into it in this first book felt really slow to me. I think that's partially because it was so academic and there wasn't a lot of action happening. It was really easy to understand everything that was going on, especially in terms of the Grisha magic, because you really are learning about the magic system alongside with Alina, which is just such an easy way to grasp what's going on. But because it was structured mostly in the way of going to class and learning, it just felt really tedious, as I personally prefer more of a learning in action type of situation. I personally find it much more captivating when the protagonists are learning about their magic and powers by trial and error rather than just sitting down and being taught everything by someone who already knows what's going on. This love for a more higher action, however, is probably why I really enjoyed the plotlines of the second 2 books more, because everything picks up so much and just so much more happens in the second 2 books in this series. And even at the end of Shadow and Bone, we really start to see more of the action that's going to take place throughout the rest of these books. Moving on to Siege and Storm, in terms of the plotline of this book, things get so much better in my opinion from where they were in Shadow and Bone. And to be completely honest, this might be a controversial opinion, but Siege and Storm was my favorite book in the whole trilogy. And I'm going to give credit to this being my favorite based more on the characters than the actual plot line, because man, I am a sucker for a good character, but we will talk about characters more momentarily. However, the plot line of this book was something that I really enjoyed. It felt like we were always moving and always going forward, and there was just always something new and exciting happened. I felt like we weren't sitting still for too long, and the pace just kept right up, and I absolutely loved it. It also had really good energy of not knowing which characters you can trust, and that is something that I really enjoy in a book and in a series. I don't want to know who I can trust until they have like fully proven themselves as a character. I want to be skeptical about them at every twist and turn until I'm like 100% sure that I can trust them. And this book had so much of that because there were so many new characters introduced, and even a lot of the older characters that were coming back, you kind of saw them in a new way and you weren't really sure whether what they were doing was trustworthy, if they were still on Alina's side. And because of that, I felt like it really helped push the pacing and the plotline of this book along. Another thing that I absolutely adored about this book is the Sanka Alina plotline, that she has now been recognized as a saint and has all of these followers that would quite literally die for her. I really found all of those characters and moments that interacted with just like the lowest of Ravka's citizens to be so interesting. To be completely honest, I think it would be really cool to have like a novella or a collection of short stories that are all from the point of view of other people who are living in Ravka while this was going on, just because they are such interesting characters and plot lines to me. And I also think that that would be like an interesting way to tell a story like this from the point of view of people who are just watching it happen from the outside. I don't know. That's not what we're here to talk about. So let's move on to the third book, Ruin and Rising. Honestly, it's a toss-up as to whether this one or Shadow and Bone was my least favorite in the series. Like, I know that Siege and Storm was my favorite, and this one has like the opposite problem of Shadow and Bone, where I felt like Shadow and Bone was just way too slow. I felt like Ruin and Rising, the pacing was all over the place in this book, to be completely honest. I felt like there were times where we were spending 50 pages on something that needed 5, and we were spending like 5 sentences on something that needed 50 pages. So it was kind of weird the way that the pacing in this book worked. I honestly think that this book very easily could have been like 100 or 200 pages longer and really drawn on some of the more dramatic and like traumatizing moments that happened in this book, because a lot of the times I felt like we just barely touched on them and I had to go back and reread a paragraph or a sentence multiple times to really figure out what the heck was going on. There were literally pages in this book where I was just so confused about what was happening and what was going on with the characters. And I think that that fast pacing has a place in some situations like that, but it felt like Leigh Bardugo was introducing a bunch of new and different ideas and then just kind of like immediately moving on from them and not super discussing them at all. And I found that to be a little bit distracting because it was really hard to follow. And honestly, I was incredibly disappointed by the ending of this book, which I'm going to touch on that. That will be the last thing that I talk about because obviously that is the most spoilery. So I will come back and talk about the ending of this series later, but yeah. Honestly, now that I have talked through all of that, I'm pretty sure that Ruin and Rising was my least favorite. So that's fine. I'm glad that I figured it out. So now, moving on from that, let's talk about the magic system that is created in the Shadow and Bone world. I just think that the magic system is so cool. The fact that it's based on moving little pieces of things and the connection to the elements that are existing around you is so fascinating to me. I also really like how it's referred to as the small science, and it's broken down super simplistically into being able to control these elements on a molecular level. So theoretically, Grisha aren't technically magicians, they're more or less scientists who manipulate this matter that's existing around them. And even though it's still not super believable and not something that would easily exist in our world, I found it much easier to follow and connect to this magic system because it was something that seemed like it could be plausibly existing in our universe. Also, really loved that this magic system was broken down into different sections. To be honest, I don't know how to pronounce any of these names, but they're broken into 3 sort of subcategories. There is one that can control like elements like earth, water, fire, another group that can only control like the human body, and the third can control things like metal and glass and kind of like build things. And this, in my opinion, made it not only easier to follow the magic system, but also to follow the characters, because specific characters were only able to do one of those 3 things. And I think it would have been just like way more confusing if people were running around able to use this magic in whatever way they wanted to. So that is all I have to say about the magic system in this series. I just think that it is a super interesting concept, and I just really wanted to talk about it for a moment because I think it's so cool. Now let's get into one of my absolute favorite parts of this series, and to be honest, most of the books that I read, and that is the characters. In particular, I really loved the side characters more than anything else in the series, and while I appreciated Alina and the other main characters like the Darkling and Mal, the side characters in this really made it for me. I really am just a sucker for a good friendship and like found family trope. While we didn't get super deep into the friendships in Shadow and Bone, we really start to see that found family come together in Siege and Storm, and they stay strong through Ruin and Rising, and I love them. Oh, I adore all of the side characters in that little family so much. So, starting in Shadow and Bone, we get Ganya as Alina's like very good friend and companion, and then we also have that counteracted by Zoya, who is just a bad bitch who literally doesn't care about anyone but herself. And there are even some other friendships in Shadow and Bone, like Alina's little friendships with Nadia and Marie, that really start to pull in these side characters and really show how important they're going to be throughout the rest of the series. It really was just interesting to watch how these friendships and these dynamics change and grow throughout the series, because a lot of them start in places that they don't finish the series in, and I found that just very fun and nice to see the way that these characters' dynamics changed and the way they all ended up coming together to work together in the end. And while we have some of these characters developed in Shadow and Bone, I really feel like we don't meet a lot of key players until Siege and Storm, which is where like the love of my life, Nikolai Landstrov, is introduced, and also the twins Tamar and Tolia, who are honestly probably my favorite characters in the whole series. When I was reading Siege and Storm, I literally took a video of myself hysterically crying while I was reading the ending of it because I was so afraid that something was gonna happen to the twins. I love the twins so much, and I'm so afraid that they're gonna die in the next 30 pages. So I'm fine. Yeah, don't worry about me, I'm fine. There really was just something about the way that Leigh Bardugo started to pull all of these characters together that felt so natural to me. I feel like a lot of times in stories like this, the friendships feel more forced and people just want to get closer to the chosen one because they're the chosen one. In this situation, however, it seemed like a lot of people really genuinely wanted to get closer to Alina because they liked and trusted her. And even if they started coming over to her side solely because they wanted to get away from the Darkling, by the end of the series, they are all really close friends. And it just made me so happy. Every character brought something totally different to the table, and seeing them all come together to work towards a cause that they all cared about and were so passionate about really was just so good and heartwarming. And now, before I end this little character section, I just want to give a huge shout out to Baghra, because honestly, she could be the best character in the whole series. She's just truly such an icon, and she's such a wonderful combination of like harsh and pushy, but you can also tell that she really cares about Alina and wants her to exceed, yet at the same time she is really struggling because obviously she cares about the Darkling and she just wants him to be a good person again, even though he sucks. And to be honest, she is a pretty minor character, but she was developed so well, and I just want her to be happy. So I just needed to talk about her because she deserves to be talked about. So now, let's move on. We have talked about the side characters. Now let's talk about more of these main characters and dive into the section that I'm sure most of you are waiting for, and that is the romance of this series. To be honest, I kind of hated every second of romance that was in this series. Honestly, like, the Darkling is a manipulative asshole and he just sucks, and Mal grew on me more as the series went on, but as far as Shadow and Bone is concerned, in my opinion, Alina was truly just whining about a boy that was supposedly her best friend, but seemed to kind of keep her to the side unless there wasn't a better option. I don't know. I'm not big fans of either of them. I mean, my personal favorite love interest was Nikolai, and honestly that was more of me being in love with Nikolai than me wanting Alina to end up with him. And I don't really usually have strong feelings about romance in fantasy novels, and 9 times out of 10 I typically tend to enjoy the romance because I think that it adds another layer onto the story. In this series I just felt like it was really distracting, and it really seemed to me like the romance was only added to fit the mold of the other books and series that were being released at this time. I just think that this series would have been much more enjoyable if even for like one book we weren't concerned and constantly thinking about who Alina was going to end up with. She's literally trying to save her whole country from centuries-old dark magic, and it seems like she is more concerned with who she's going to be kissing than how she's going to save these people, and it was just kind of annoying to me. And in that same vein, I just need to call out darklina shippers right now, which I'm a little afraid to do, but it has to be done. I just want to know why. Like, listen, I am all for an enemies to lovers romance. It is one of my favorite tropes, but the Darkling isn't like Alina's enemy who has some redeemable qualities. He is literally a villain who just wants to kill everyone in his way to take over and gain power. He's truly just pure evil, and I get that you are lured in a little bit in the beginning of Shadow and Bone, and there's like a hook there. And Leigh Bardugo wants you to bite it. I know that she does. But my goodness, after you find out that he's a raving lunatic, you should probably stop liking him so much. And genuinely, every time they talked about the fact that he was so much older than her, it made me so uncomfortable. So like, yeah, I just want to know why anyone ships the Darkling and Alina. And I mean, if you do, good for you. Like, I'm kind of happy for you. But also, I just don't understand. Not that Mal and Alina are literally any better together, but at least Mal is kind of nice to her towards the end of the series, whereas the Darkling just literally sucks. All of that being said, let's dive into my thoughts on the ending of the series, because oh boy, do I have some opinions. And this is the section of the video where it is going to get very, very spoilery. Like, if you haven't finished Ruin and Rising, I'm quite literally going to be talking about how the whole series ends. So if this is where you say goodbye, thanks for hanging out this far, and hopefully I'll see you back again on one of my other videos soon. So, for those of you who are sticking around for this, here we go. I just want to know, literally what the hell was the ending of this series? Alina Starkov deserved so much better. And if I'm being honest, like, so did Mal. And I recognize that taking away any kind of powers that either of them have was just such like an easy way to tie up the story and just put it away and never have to pull it back out again. But my God, it was just such a wild way to end the series. I was, of course, very happy with the Darkling's death because, like I have said multiple times now, he just absolutely is the worst. So I'm glad that he died. But like, the fact that Mal and Alina both lost any sort of powers that they had just broke my heart. Like, absolutely shattered it into a million pieces for reasons that I can't completely explain. And like, the epilogue with Alina in the window playing with the light coming through, like, are you kidding me? Give the girl her powers back. She deserves them. This poor girl truly discovered that she was a Grisha and within like a year's time lost all of her powers? What? That's so mean to her. That's so mean to her. And not to be like the most controversial, but genuinely in my ideal ending of this book, both the Darkling and Mal would have died. Alina would have gotten to keep her powers and she would have gone on to be the commander of the Second Army again, or even moved into a role like Baghra, who is teaching new Grisha how to use their powers. I'm genuinely just so upset that she lost her power. I just want her to keep it or get it back or something. I don't know. I just feel like she deserved so much more after everything that she went through in this series to have it all like ripped away from her in a matter of seconds. is so sad. Just absolutely broke my heart. And it also really felt like the ending was just super rushed. It felt like we got to a point where it was just like, alrighty, we've got to wrap this up. Let's just see what can we do to tie a bow and call it a day. And so I really do like understand why it ended the way it did, because we needed a solid ending to Alina's story so that it wasn't something we had the ability to come back to in the future. Like, clearly Leigh Bardugo wanted this to be the end of Alina and her story. While I totally understand that, it just was very sad and very like kind of abrupt to me. Honestly, because of that, I'm very glad that we have Six of Crows and the Rule of Wolves, because it gives us a chance to see some of our favorite characters again, even if Alina isn't one of them. And so, with all of that being said, we have reached the end of this video, just full of my thoughts about the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And if you have stuck with me until the end, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you didn't find my opinions to be too controversial. And just thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you again with another video soon. Bye!